Hey there. Welcome to C3 Church, Long Island. We're so excited you decided to join us this morning for our online service. We're here at C3 to help you live your best life for the glory of God. We have an amazing message, and our worship team is prepared to lead you in a phenomenal time of worship this morning. Please come join us.
6 hours, one Friday, nearly 2 millennia ago. Was it just another Friday of commonplace executions on a rugged hill that went by the name of Golgotha in the Aramaic? Or is it one of the most momentous Fridays in human history? That's the question. Is it nothing or is it everything? The resurrection of Jesus Christ, 3 days after the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, puts paid to the fact that what the Old Testament prophesied, what Jesus taught would be accomplished through his cross, in fact did happen. If you have the eyes to see, the ears to hear, the heart to understand, by the grace of God, you realized it wasn't just another agonizing, shameful execution, but it was God with us, paying the price for our sin that only he could pay. Theologians call this the atonement. And what they mean by the atonement is, what did Jesus accomplish on the cross? What did he work out for our benefit? What provision is there for us? What exchange happened? Because he was our substitute, our representative. He paid our penalty for our sin. He was abandoned by God. Matter of fact, for 6 hours, the one who had the most intimate hotline to heaven relationship with the Father experienced for the first time a forsakenness. And he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And that's a twofold meaning. First of all, he really felt forsaken, because a holy God, a just God, a righteous God cannot look at all the sin of mankind in a place of judgment. And he forsook the Son of God like the scapegoat in the wilderness, in fulfillment of Old Testament types of sacrifices. But there's also a second very important meaning, because the Jewish people didn't refer to the book of Genesis as the book of Genesis. They referred to the book of Genesis by the first words of the book of Genesis, which translated into the English as in the beginning. They didn't refer to Psalms like Psalm 22. They referred to it by the opening words of Psalm 22, which are, my God, why have you forsaken me? So not is he crying out the fact that he feels forsaken, but he's speaking out to anybody in the crowd who has a scripture-soaked mind, who has a biblical worldview. He's saying, go read what we know as Psalm 22, because you're going to see 1,000 years before this day a prophecy and a prediction of what's going to happen on this day. It's a Psalm of David, and he describes things happening in that psalm that never happened to him in his life. My life's being poured out like water. All my joints, all my bones are out of joint. That's what happens on a crucifixion. You can't support your body weight. You're hanging, nailed, hands and feet to two cross beams. And within an hour, boy, you need a chiropractic adjustment like you can't imagine. But that's the least of your problems. And he talks about the fact that they've pierced my hands and my feet. That never happened to King David, but it happened to the son of David 1,000 years later. And then King David talks about how they're taking my garments and they're dividing it amongst themselves, and they're casting lots for my clothing. That never happened to King David. It happened to the son of David, Jesus. Do you realize how powerfully profound the scriptures are to predict something with such accuracy 1,000 years before it happened, and hundreds of years before the Romans even used crucifixion as a form of execution? And then Isaiah, 800 years before the fact, tells us what happened on the cross of Calvary. He says in the 53rd chapter, Verse 4, and I'm taking this from Young's literal translation. It's going to come across a little bit wooden, but there's some Hebrew words here that need to be translated the way they're translated throughout the entire Old Testament. There's 2 Hebrew words here that are translated 60 to 70 times, and they're always translated in the way that I'm going to read them, except for in most translations, they put in griefs or sorrows, because they just can't wrap their brain around what's actually being said. Surely our sicknesses he hath borne. That's usually translated sorrows. I'm glad he bore our sorrows as well. But the literal Hebrew is, surely our sicknesses he hath borne. Our pains he hath carried them. Notice they're not his sicknesses, they're not his pains, they're ours. And he voluntarily, intentionally, willingly takes them upon himself. Can we just pause and say thank you? Thank you. That's why we're singing songs of praise and celebration tonight, because we're looking at what happened 2,000 years ago through the eyes of Easter. And we have esteemed him plagued or cursed, smitten of God, and afflicted. Verse 5, but he was pierced 800 years before he was pierced. Isaiah the prophet said, he was pierced. He was pierced for our transgressions, not his, for ours. He was crushed for our iniquities, not his, ours. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. I'm so thankful for the shalom of God, that well-being, that peace that transcends, that rises above all human understanding and human predicament and human challenge and even human joy. And it comes because of a punishment that was on him. Theologians call this the penal substitutionary atonement. And what they mean by that is that there was a penalty paid. A judicial punishment was exacted for our sin, and he was our substitute. And then, as we just sang, and by his wounds, literally by his stripes, we are healed. Again, 800 years before Jesus was scourged, the prophet sees that Jesus was scourged. Living word from a living God. That's a living word today from the living God to us. Verse 6, we all, not some, not a few, not many, not a lot, we all, like sheep, stupid and stubborn animals, cute but stupid and stubborn, tasty but stupid and stubborn, we all like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. We each have our own way of sin, of disobedience and rebellion. And we like to condemn someone else's way of sin and justify our way of sin. And they like to condemn our way of sin and justify their way of sin. And God says, all your ways of sin I condemn, but if you believe in Jesus Christ, you shall be justified. The Lord laid on him. This is the first time in this passage that we read that God was behind all of this. This was his eternal purpose, his predetermined will. Yes, Jesus took this upon himself willingly. That's why he was agonizing on the Thursday night before Good Friday in the Garden of Gethsemane and crying out, may this cup pass from me. Not because he wanted to disobey God, because he realized the abject horror of what he was about to go through. In the humanity, Jesus fully divine, fully human, the humanity of him is realizing it's going to hurt. This is going to be really, really difficult. But it's not just the physical pain. I believe it's the separation from his Father that was causing him the greatest angst of all. But then he prays this prayer of consecration. This is the prayer of consecration of all prayers of consecration. Not my will, but yours be done. As your pastor, if you want to experience relief in any area of your life, I recommend not my will, but your will be done. But I don't like his will. Not my will, but your will be done. He's asking me to do something I don't want to do. Not my will, but your will be done. You will find the greatest love, the greatest freedom, the greatest liberty, the greatest breakthrough. You'll look back at that prayer of consecration as the defining moment of your life. So in conclusion, at the cross, an exchange took place that was divinely ordained and predicted by God. Very simple, but very profound. Here's the exchange. All the evil due by justice to come upon us because of our willful disobedience came upon Jesus, so that all the good due to Jesus earned by his sinless obedience may be made available to us who believe in him. What a deal. That's the good news. So there's 8 exchanges that we're just going to put up on the screen. There's others, but these are the primary ones. The first is that Jesus was punished for our sin that we might be forgiven. Second exchange, Jesus was wounded that we might be healed. The third, Jesus was made sin so that we might become the righteousness of God. Jesus died our death that we might share his life. The fifth exchange, Jesus was made a curse that we might receive the blessing. Anybody getting a hint of the good in Good Friday? Jesus bore our shame that we might share his glory. Jesus endured our rejection that we might enjoy his acceptance. Finally, last but not least, Jesus bore our poverty that we might receive his riches. That's taken right from 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 9. The whole context is financial. It's actually an offering message from the Apostle Paul. But there's many other passages that will say that that's spiritual as well. He took our spiritual impoverishment so that we could have a spiritual abundance, which he himself enjoys.